Let's talk about shadow work today. What is shadow work actually? So someone in the comments last week talked about being a part of a bhakti yoga community and using the shadow work and giving that shadow up to a higher deity and allowing that deity to work through the shadowing process. And there's many other examples of how we interpret working with our shadow self as that relates to Kundalini awakening, stabilizing our soul through our personality, and what that looks like in life. One thing to talk about is that for many people, when we have Kundalini awakening, it erupts through our being, and there are different purification processes that happen. And so we go through what we call the dark night of the soul. And oftentimes I see in people's processes that the dark night of the soul, as we commonly term it, or that we commonly reference it, is about 7 years of this general process that people go through. Don't stick to that number. It's just something very arbitrary that I see in people's process. That said, and maybe there's something more scientific to it that I'm not aware of. That said, there's still so much going on. So yes, this initial huge shift that people experience, and Kundalini moves through their being, this evolutionary process. It moves through different patterns throughout their aura and their system, and those patterns come up for review and they process those out. That's one way to think of shadow work. That said, I'm going to talk about this in maybe a slightly different way today. If you think about your personality, in your spiritual anatomy, and you have your soul, and above your soul there's actually a connection that eventually gets to what we would call spirit. There's different energies that we interact with along the way that support our process in service in the world. And so Kundalini awakening first starts with, yes, us having more of a spiritual recognition of our connection with spirit in our lives. And so for many people, it has bliss and visions and psychic information. There's so much that can happen with that. And then on a very real practical level, so we go up with these, spiritual visions and feeling these highs, and the low part, right, would be grounding this into a stable personality vehicle. So that would be our etheric body including our chakras and our nadis, our meridians. It would include the way that our energy is able to flow through our system with ease. It would also include our astral body, our emotional body. This would be the way that our personality interacts in the world with our desires, our hopes, stabilization of those things. So if you're someone still operating from a lot of patterns that destabilize your personality, being in situations in the world where there's a challenge to be in equanimity, and this isn't saying that a personality needs to be perfect, but what we're defining here is what we're doing with shadow work, right? Shadow work equating that we're having a stable personality vehicle for the soul to operate through. So again, we go to the emotional level, we see how we're stabilized in day-to-day situations within the emotional level, and then we also look at the mental level and the mental plane. For some spiritual aspirants, this gets tricky because they'll bring their energy into certain focuses to bypass the stabilization of the personality vehicle. And this is why there's so much talk in the New Age stuff about, okay, people are bypassing. Well, bypassing is also a very tricky thing to see within ourselves. And so there's things that we do in Rose Awakening to help people see these areas that may be bypassing based on their astrology and their rayology, to see these are very specific things that tend to happen in a person's system that we can look at to see and have more awareness about these bypassing dynamics. So when the person originally asked the question about, well, if they just give all of their shadows to a deity, if you give all your shadows to the soul, if you give all your shadows to God, is that enough? Does that work? And it's like two wings of an eagle, right? We have the wing of grace and we have the wing of our own effort. And every single step of the way of the spiritual path requires both. It actually requires your own skill sets. It requires your being able to navigate these situations with virtue, with skill. So that means being in challenging situations, being in relationship, being in the world, and being in equanimity, learning how to navigate the world with greater ease and balance, so that when you do bring soul in, that it's able to stabilize, that you're able to have a life that is balanced through that soul, and rather than where you have people have soul come in, and because they keep trying to develop soul without grounding it truly. Like when I say grounding, it's not just going through every single chakra level, it's transforming your relationship with the world and how you interact through your mental and emotional body, your etheric body, through that grounding. So what happens when we just keep going higher and higher spiritually without actually transforming our fears, our anxieties, to learn how to operate through these things in very practical, tangible ways, then we have a life that is highly imbalanced. And if you think about the spiritual process as one that supports us being greater, having greater usefulness in the world, that we have the ability to serve, to love, to care, to work in accordance with hierarchy as the plan is continually unfolding, to have resonance with that, to be able to act within that in real time. And when the light comes in, to have clarity of that light in transmission through your being, and that it's able to ground with clarity. And so it only grounds with clarity when we have certain stabilization within our system as far as building out our light body, because that's the communication network to our actually serving in the world in like the divine orchestra of how we can most serve through our own unique soul notes and skills that we have. And this all doesn't happen unless we have a stabilized personality vehicle. So you may have heard that the hot air balloon can go only as high as it's tethered to the ground. And so the way that we're operating, and these can be nuances, because I say fear, but you might think, oh, I'm really scared of these certain things. But there's actually nuances within that, and like how we operate in relationship, how we operate mentally, how we're processing the world, through our emotions and our etheric body. And I say those are separate things, but then they're also all combined as well, and that they all work together. And so if there's an imbalance in one body, you're going to have it in all the other bodies, including your spiritual bodies. And so that's where we start to untether things. When we do shadow work, when we actually do the grounded, practical, psychological, skill building relationship ways of operating in the world, and we see that the spiritual path is more than just operating in these higher realms. We see that by actually doing this really practical, tangible work, that we're learning how to ground this. And then through grounding that, again, we have greater clarity in how we operate with a greater plan. And so when we're asking, how, am I doing the shadow work by doing this? Yes, you are. And there's so much more to it. And there's even so much more to it than what I'm saying in this video. That's just as a preliminary way to look at shadow work, that if you look at your life path and situation and you see, where do I have these imbalances? When certain things happen in my life, do I get really, really emotional to where if I was to build out my higher mind, would that allow me to balance the emotional experience? Or otherwise, there might be a lot more things going on there. If you think about when we talk about shadow, it's just any part of us that is still waiting for soul to infuse, soul to fully embody, soul to fully reveal the potential of any operating system within ourselves, any way of being within ourselves. So again, it's not like, we go through the dark night of the soul is 7 years and it's like, oh, we're good. We did this. Because I hear so much, it's like, oh, I'm still doing it. Oh, these things are still coming up. I've already done this. And the thing is that we continually revisit all of these shadows on a new turn of the spiral. And so if we were to have the highest turn of the spiral at the lowest point of our consciousness, how painful would that gap be for us to embody a new way of being and interacting and all these things? And so the path is very, very, very nuanced. And again, it's synthesized between multiple levels of our system. And because of that, it can seem complex. And what I love about what we do at Rose Awakening is that we try to make it as simple and methodical as possible, knowing these are things that we can look at. These are things that we can build out in our system that make it easier for us to process what is occurring and to build stabilization within our system that allows us to be able to work on these turns of the spiral with greater awareness and understanding of actually what's occurring. I remember in the last video, I think I said something about like fear and working with fear. And I know like our personalities say, okay, this is so simple. And sometimes it's those really, really simple things, the really foundational things that make a really big difference for us later on. And so no matter how spiritual you are, no matter how much light you're feeling, continually being curious about the shadow work, the integration, the personality, the real life application of how you're relating in the world, how you're serving in the world, how you're using your unique note to contribute to the world is always going to be more and more and more relevant, because your spiritual path is about greater responsibility and service in the world. And so if we look at it that way, you can see how tangible it is to actually ground light through your system and do the shadow works. You can do the soul work so you can give the world your soul's work. If you made it this far, I'm wishing you so many blessings, and take care.